When you're at the limit, you have to be calm and cool. I remember one time we went golfing, and I shank it off to the right, and he shanks it off to the left, and we're nowhere near the fairway. And we just put our clubs back in. We're laughing. And what is your guys' problem? Why you throw your club into the pond? And Freddie and I talked about it afterward. Like, well, once you go through turn 8 at Willow Springs with the wind blowing 40 miles an hour and you don't close the throttle, everything else kind of takes a certain perspective.
I think I've fallen off bikes more than I've stayed on them. So I think that's why I want to talk to Nick here.
Okay, welcome to It's Not the Car. I'm Sam Smith. I'm a writer and a journalist. I used to club race a lot for years, and now I club race a lot less. I miss it, but as this podcast so often reminds me, I should really just sell a kidney and some other useless body parts and start racing more again. There's no drawback whatsoever to that. Don't tell me if there is. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Ross. How are you guys?
Hello, guys. How you doing? I'm Jeff Brown. I'm as we always say, a motorhome driver. I've lately been motorhome mechanic and getting ready to be motorhome driver for the rest of the year. And I moonlight as a race engineer in the IMSA series.
And I'm a race driver. Well, I was one. I'm Ross Bentley.
He says.
Yeah, I was one. And I drove a motorhome once, Jeff, and didn't crash it. So yeah, I got away with it. Yeah.
All right.
Probably could have used some mechanical work afterwards, but yeah. I used to drive race cars, kind of like Sam used to do things, and now I coach. Now I coach drivers, which is even more fun.
The older I get, the more I want to talk about things I used to do, and I hate the fact that I want to talk about that. But it's just, I don't know. You guys are very, very much younger than I am. So with that, we're coming to the end of the year, and we're also coming to the end of this round of guest spots we've been doing. This is, in fact, the last normal INTC episode of the year. Next week's one will be a show that I've built in studio from some stuff that happened at VR earlier this summer. We're pretty excited about it. It was a lot of fun. But now we have our final guest of the year, and like I said, our final traditional show. Now, guests on the show are a rare appearance, but the show, It's Not the Car, will be 1 year old as of the first week of January. And what that means is by the end of the year, we'll have done 52 episodes, which still seems strange to me that we pulled that off and got this far, but you guys have made all that possible. Most of you listen to the show on audio only. A small percentage finds us on YouTube, but either way, there are thousands of you. You've found us at tracks and at car shows and out in the wild. You've put the show #1 on the Apple Automotive charts multiple times, which is just the coolest thing in the world. And you've told us that this means something to you, whatever it is that we're doing here, which, if I'm honest, I don't know about you guys, Jeff, Ross, but this is mostly just diving into things that we love, right? And we wouldn't keep doing it if people didn't keep showing up to listen. And we just wanted to take a minute to thank everybody for that.
Yeah, big time thanks, because I think every now and then we kind of go, what should we do? And then we sort of just look at each other and go, whatever is fun for us. That's how we've developed this thing, right?
Exactly. Some people listening might think that we are doing this for them, but we're doing it because the three of us like to talk about it.
Selfish.
Huh?
Yes.
Yeah, we're just selfish slobs, really.
Yeah.
It's this massive vote of confidence that the stuff we want to nerd out about is also stuff that people care about, because it makes me feel not alone. I'm a writer, which means that most of my life is spent sitting in a room feeling very alone and wondering if anybody's listening. But anyway, because we do love doing this, all your listens and your views and your merch buys and everything else, it just matters. So thank you. That said, we again have one more guest for this year. And he is, no surprise, somebody who spends a lot of time in a part of motorsport that we just can't get enough of. He's a winning motorcycle road racer, but he's also a talented writer and a hell of a good teacher. He's written for Motorcyclist and Cycle World magazines on the theory and practice of how your brain works on the bike. He was the founding editor of Sport Rider magazine. He spent 12 years as lead instructor at the Freddy Spencer Riding School. And some year back, he wrote an excellent book on fast riding called Sport Riding Techniques, How to Develop I'm saying the whole subtitle because I just think it's cool, how to develop real-world skills for speed, safety, and confidence on the street and track. These days, he's the chief instructor at the Yamaha Champions Riding School, traveling around the country, helping people ride better. He's Nick Ienatsch, and it is a joy to have him on the show. Nick, welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. I'm sorry we're going to have to shut down your whole show after this episode, but it's been a good year, so why not, right? So I appreciate it.
I like people that think like us.
Yeah.
No, fingers crossed we get to keep doing this. Who knows? It may all go to hell next week, but wild, blatant optimism. If that isn't the definition of racing, I don't know what is. But so one of the reasons we asked you on for 1,000 reasons, but one of the reasons we asked you to come on is because the first time I met you at YCRS at the school a couple of years ago. I was there for a piece for Cycle World. The whole idea was that you have this person who has a bunch of background in cars and also rides motorcycles and is decent at one of those things and not that great at the other. And how much would transfer? How much would you guys put up with me? Where you were patient? Whether or not I would fall off and run into a tree. And luckily, I didn't run into a tree or fall off, but I did learn an awful lot. And one of the things that I noticed was that you and my old friend Ross Bentley both think about things the same way. And by that I mean it all comes down to the mental game, right? Ross, what is it about that end of stuff for you that, I don't know, I mean, all three of us have spent time on bikes, but how does your brain work on a bike?
You asking me how it works on a bike?
Yeah, man.
I think I've fallen off bikes more than I've stayed on them. So I think that's why I want to talk to Nick here. Nick, how do I stay on a bike? Actually,
first, don't fall off.
Can I just jump right into that question? Because that just kind of hit me here is, like I've had a lot of race drivers who, they drove cautiously and they never really pushed that last little bit. And then they have a crash and they walk away and they go, wasn't as bad as I thought. And then they're faster after that. Now, some get scared and they go slower. But I'm curious, Nick, how many riders after they've fallen go, wasn't as bad as I thought? And then they're better. Does that work? Or is it just me that's whacked like that?
I would say there's fewer riders than car drivers that experience that. I think that you have a building of confidence as you go quicker and quicker and quicker, and then you have a big off and it sets you back, especially if you're hurt and your bike is almost always badly destroyed. It's rarely a spin out into the dirt like you can experience in a car. So I think it's almost the opposite, Ross, that people are spooked by it. It sets them back. And it's a huge push in our instruction is to have people make small mistakes that are recoverable in the width of the track, as opposed to make these big mistakes because it sets you back so much.
I got to tell you, and I had an older cousin who raced way, way, way back, would have been in the 70s, I guess. He and a guy from Bellingham, Washington, Stevie Baker, who went on.
Oh, yeah. I've met him. I know him. He's a hero. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so my cousin was always like, you guys that race cars, you guys are crazy. Like you crash a car and it wrecks the car and it hurts, costs so much. And I'm thinking, well, the reason technically he wasn't my cousin, he was my cousin-in-law, because he went to the local hospital That's so important. Often that my cousin, who was a nurse there, they ended up getting married. So, there is that difference, I guess, between riders.
But that's so funny, right? Because every car racer that I know that I've known or known that hasn't spent any time on bikes, their number one reaction when they find out that somebody races bikes is like, "What the hell do you do that for? You fall off." Like there's this whole back and forth between the two camps. It's like, you guys are nuts. Why would you do that? That's the dumbest thing in the world.
Along those lines, I have a question for Nick. And this is getting maybe off topic, but you coach guys and girls on how to ride motorcycles. Do you coach them about how to fall off a motorcycle? Because I watch MotoGP and I see those guys, quote, crash. And Mark Marquez crashes, and he seems like he's an excellent faller because he doesn't get hurt that often for the number of crashes he has. Do you teach him how to do that, or is it just learned by doing it a lot?
It's not a subject we teach, and we'll get the question occasionally, and we'll say, "Well, try to get on your back, get your arms, get your fingers in, this kind of thing." But it's not a subject we teach now, and maybe it should be. But as you can imagine, and as Sam witnessed, in the first 5 minutes, we're talking about how you don't crash, other than slowing down, because that would be one way to do it. Go slow. Well, the best way to do it, not crash a motorcycle, is not get on a motorcycle. Second best way would just be to ride so slowly, but it's not really our personality. So we get into, in our case, the 7 reasons we crash a motorcycle. We work really hard on those. But it's a question we get privately, like, "Hey, I fell down, I hurt myself, my friends fall down, they don't hurt themselves, what do I do?" We'll talk about it then. And we don't not talk about it because it's a little bit morbid. It just isn't. It hasn't been a subject that we have felt was a priority enough to address in our school.
Makes sense.
Interesting, Nick. Like early on when I was getting involved with racing cars and then teaching it, nobody ever talked about crashing. But now it's become a thing, and I think it's come out of mostly from IndyCar racing. Like, if you're going to go into a wall, get your hands off the wheel. And we still see. Was it last year Ricciardo at Formula One and at Zandvoort crashed, broke his wrist or whatever? Alexander Rossi earlier this year wasn't it, that he crashed and broke a thumb or a hand or something like that. So it happens, and I think drivers are, it's sort of being passed on. If you're going to crash, you're going to hit something, get your hands off the wheel. So
yeah, and like with Ricciardo, I don't think he had time almost. The situation, he popped kind of over the hill into that bowl, and he just almost didn't have time because he knows better. Yeah. But I can imagine that would be stunning. The to not talk about crashing, I think, is to basically ignore what happens with these big mistakes. And so if you jump right into it and make it, and in our case, we jump right into it and let people know that this sport will hurt you. Our sport will hurt you. Cars will hurt you, but not like motorcycles that will hurt you. So we need to get extremely focused on mistakes that lead to a crash.
Interesting. I've worked with instructors who it's almost like walk in the room and they're like, "You're going to die. You're going to crash and die." And they think that let's scare them to death so that they don't do it. And to me, I'm always going that's like telling somebody don't think about a pink elephant, right? And so you have to approach it in the right way. You have to say, accept that things can happen, but let's not get overly focused on it. I got to think that's how you kind of approach that, or.
Absolutely, and that's exactly right. And the instance I use with the students, as I say, if I wanted to go hang gliding, one of the very first questions I'd ask the hang glider instructors: how are people dying doing this? What are the mistakes made, and how do I prevent those mistakes? And he would walk me 2 or 3 things.
Not hitting the ground.
Yeah, without the shoe. So that's the way we approach it, is that it's not dwelling on the crash. It's saying that has happened. And you can imagine by the time people show up at our school, which is a pretty high-end school, it's pretty committed, they have probably fallen off a motorcycle. And some of them are there because they did fall off. They don't know why, and they're going to quit unless they fix it. So I think it's in the way we bring it up, it is saying this is the problem. Here's the steps to avoid it.
Yeah. Yeah. So without making this thing too morbid,
Ross says as he asks about death and again.
Yeah. Can we take a step back, because how cool is it that you've worked so closely with Freddy Spencer? And as a total geek here, I could just ask you and want you to tell us stories and what made him so great and all that kind of stuff. But can you just give us a little perspective of Freddy Spencer and what he's meant to you and what he's meant to the sport? Not just what he did racing, but what he's done in terms of the learning about riding.
Yes, I He's one of my favorite people. He's a very decent person. He treated us so fairly. He was when he had to say no to a request, he would say no and do it in the right way. So he was a very decent person. We are friends. If we lived close together, we'd do a lot of stuff together. He has been out to 3 or 4 schools at YCRS over the winters of the last 2 years, and so he really still enjoys it. My wife likes him, and she doesn't like anybody, so that's a good sign. And Freddie was totally addicted to learning how to ride a dirt bike when he was a kid. He was a little bit introverted, and so getting away on his dirt bike, and he tells stories, and maybe you've heard them, and I don't want to bore anybody, but he would put a quarter in the dirt and then try to hit the quarter with his front tire every lap. And of course, the quarter would move. You try to see it and find it and hit the quarter. And he truly revolutionized so much of what's happening in America because he insisted on teaching every student how to trail brake. And it wasn't an option as many people talk about it. Some people feel trail braking is for track only. But unfortunately, the motorcycle doesn't know whether it's on the track, parking lot, back road. Tires don't know. It just works well or it works poorly. And so to have it work well, we're trailing brake pressure in the corner. And he insisted on teaching that at the very beginning. And so he did truly revolutionize. And all of us who worked for him, myself, Ken Hill, Jeff Haney, Dale Kiefer, Mark Schellinger, Shane Turpin, all of us took his message and just boom, just took it up to the next level in everything we did. The other thing about Freddie is, he's just so calm and cool, because when you're at the limit, you have to be calm and cool. None of these guys jump around and are silly fools. Eddie or Freddie, any of these people at the limit. And I remember one time we went golfing, we were not, Freddie's a much better golfer than I am, but we're not good golfers. We got paired with this couple and we go and tee off somewhere, and I shank it off into the right and he shanks it off to the left, and we're nowhere near the fairway. And we just put our clubs back in, we're laughing, and the couple like, what is your guys' problem? Why you throw your club into the pond? and Freddie and I talked about it afterward. Like, well, once you go through turn 8 at Willow Springs with the wind blowing 40 miles an hour and you don't close the throttle, everything else kind of takes a certain perspective. That kind of, and of course, Freddie, once you line up for a rainy Grand Prix on a 500 Grand Prix bike and it's 33 degrees and it's barely starting to sleet, nothing else really gets you upset.
Yeah.
Hey, so how does that? So you've got a guy there. He's a triple world champion. Kind of a spiritual dude. I mean, I think the title of his autobiography was, Jeff and I were talking about this earlier, it's just feel, right? Everything he did came down to learning, thinking about how the bike worked, asking questions about what he didn't know, which is all the stuff we talk about all the time here. But how does that translate into how you build a school around going faster, but also how you evolve that over the years, right? Because YCRS grew out of, you started it out of the roots of the Freddy Spencer School. Like how did his philosophy turn into how you teach people?
The only hit I ever heard against Freddy Spencer School is we didn't ride enough. That was one thing I would hear from certain personalities, like we didn't ride enough. So we increased the amount of time on the bike at the YCRS, and we just changed some of the formatting. We introduced things a little bit earlier in a little bit different way. But as Ross knows, at the very pointy end, at the very tip of the spear, where either you're going very, very quickly or you have no grip, one of the two, just make your choice. Could be you're on a rain tire and it dries out, and all of a sudden it all matters. At the pointy end of the spear, it all matters. And for all the street riders, it means you've popped over the hill and it's freshly graveled and traffic is stopped, and all of a sudden you're at the limit of grip. So that then it can only be taught in a certain way, not in a certain order. The order starts to matter on a broad scheme, but it can be backfilled with the right information. So we change the format a little bit. For instance, we start outside, as you remember, Sam, we start outside in the parking lot with us standing there grouped around a bike and a tire, because it has to feel dynamic. I never wanted to, I ideally don't want to start sitting down with the chalkboard. I'd like to start out in the parking lot. So we started it that way. We got on the track sooner, etc. But one of the things that has really helped me after the Freddy School is I spoke with a gentleman in Ukraine, and he was, he taught martial arts. He taught knife fighting. I mean, he just, kind of a badass instructor at high level stuff. And I said, how was it that Freddie could not ride for 2 years competitively, just, not ride, and show up at Suzuka and put it on pole? I mean, why could a guy do that? And this gentleman said it's because he's classically trained. And so we began to talk about this classical training. For instance, if you know what speed does to your radius, if you know what on bikes front tire grip is made of, brake pressure plus lean angle, if you know that you initiate braking just to transfer weight forward, if you get those classic thoughts in your mind, you become that rider who just rules on every bike they touch. You don't have to ride every day to be a very good rider because you slip right into this classical training. And that is different than the person who says, okay, to jump behind me, just do everything I do, and just run it in there, terms like that. That's not classical training. So one of the things that we really focused on and do focus on with YCRS is, why would we teach you this? What is the bike doing with your input? Why does the bike run wide? What is the rider doing to make the bike run wide? Not just what geometry changes are being made on the bike. What's the rider doing to make those geometry changes? So that's part of the what we believed in when we started YCRS, is let's make sure all riders know why the bike's doing what it's doing. And because if you think about YCRS, it's a 2-day school. It's not designed so you come back, but we have like 46% return rate. So a lot of people come back, but it's designed so in 2 days you leave there with all your notes and you have it figured out. I'm not saying you're particularly proficient at it, but you will be proficient if you follow this classical training. So that's one of the changes we made a little more in depth from Freddy's.
That makes a lot of sense.
Jeff, you because you've gone and you've done some track day stuff. So I'm curious when you hear that, because Nick, I just got a T-shirt that has an H pattern shifter like on it, and underneath it says "classically trained." Because as you know, nowadays everyone just got paddle shifts and they don't have a clue what that pedal over on the left side does in a car.
Interesting.
So I love the classically trained. Yeah. And the understanding the why behind everything. Like what you just said is, sorry, that could have been me. So anyways, Jeff, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's what I was going to say. It's very similar, Sam's right, to Ross's philosophy, to the point where we just had, it was my son Colin, but a pro race car driver talking about, he didn't use the words classically trained, but what you just described about knowing the limit. He always talks about feeling the tire limit. So it doesn't matter whether he's in a GT car, a prototype, a rallycross car. He's trying to drive the thing at the limit. It doesn't matter if he's at Suzuka in the sleet when it's 30 degrees or at Laguna Seca when it's max grip, and you're still driving it to that limit. And I love your classically trained thought on that, because they can do that. And so that leads me to the question. I have done some track days on my 600 track day bike, very poorly. But the thing that always scared me was finding that limit, because I get it in a car, and if you get it a little wrong, it slides and you get some oversteer, and maybe you catch it and maybe you don't, but there's some forgiveness there. When I'm out on my motorcycle at a track day, bombing around in the beginner group, I'm thinking about what I know about cars, but I'm always like, am I 20% away from the limit, or am I 0.2% away from the limit? And I don't want to get 0.2% because I know I'm not going to get that right. How do you teach the limit on a bike? It would seem hard.
Yeah. Every top rider has dirt bikes in the garage. We all slide around in the dirt. We all play it in the dirt. When it snows, we're playing in the snow. Everybody's sliding around, breaking grip, feeling when it breaks grip, focused on breaking grip. So, but if you don't have that, one of the core tenets of what we teach is the tire will take a tremendous load. It will not take an abrupt load. And so that idea, that abrupt load of taking that contact patch, which is relatively small on the front tire when you're accelerating, and snapping on the brakes and literally beating the weight transfer. And Ross, that's a big difference with bikes to cars, is that we have 5 inches of travel to work through on a sport bike, could have 10 on an adventure bike, which we get a lot of adventure bikes to the school. So we've got to work through that 5 inches of travel, then the tire loads. So this idea, Jeff, that when you pick up your throttle, you're coming off the brakes, because you would trail brake at our school, you're coming off the brakes, you pick up the throttle just to move weight backward, just to expand the tire. Kenny Roberts Sr. wrote in his book, I'll pick up the throttle just to tighten the chain. That was a great mental thought. So you're picking up initial throttle to go tighten the chain, move weight back, load that tire. At that point, the tire yells up and goes, yo, I have grip left, or I'm near the limit. And so what we'll work on, especially with our top riders, and, I've got insanely fast, qualified racers working for me. What we'll work on at that level when they're working with a very fast student is realizing that if we add throttle progressively in a linear fashion, the tire will break loose in linear fashion, and the tire will go and it'll spin in a linear fashion. If we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, load the tire, and then go 40, it could break loose on a very fast bike. So if we're always moving in a linear fashion, we will almost crash. And in our world, we will take that all day. An almost crash is like, thank you. And, somebody will come in and say, man, I almost tucked the front and it just let go for a moment. We will say, well, congratulations, because you're adding brake pressure or lean angle, or you're giving away brake pressure, one of those three, giving away or adding lean angle in a linear fashion, and it slides in a linear fashion. So we really get people focused on this idea. So it gets into this thing that we left Sam with before he left the school, is it's just called quit crashing your coffee. Quit crashing your coffee. In other words, in everyday life, right, Sam? In everyday life, watch out. Watch when you're abrupt. I go pick my water bottle up and I'm abrupt and I knock my water bottle over. I'm not hurt, but I just picked up my throttle or brake pressure or lean angle too quickly and I'm down. So we really get focused on that because the penalties are so high. If we make these little mistakes, we can gather them up. It's when we make these big abrupt movements that we work so hard on eliminating.
This is exactly the point in the show where we don't talk about how much I've spilled coffee on myself. But one of the things that you mentioned that I had never occurred to me, and I felt deeply doofus naive for not thinking about this. But you were talking, because again, so much of YCRS, like any good performance school, whether it's cars or bikes or, I don't know, performance fishing or learning how to draw, any good performance school teaches you what you were talking about, the reasons behind why you do what you do. And when you first started in on the trail braking session in the classroom, I was sitting there thinking, yeah, okay, that blah, 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 weight transfer helps things move. All the things that work in a car on 4 wheels, weight is weight, a contact patch is a contact patch. These things all make sense, but it never occurred to me that on a bike, what you're doing when you trail brake and what you're managing there is the collapse of the fork. And when the fork collapses, the geometry changes and the bike actually gets more willing to turn geometrically. And then the notion that, I sat there and had this stupid kind of kindergarten level galaxy brain moment where everything suddenly clicked, and thinking about that and how little I knew about that, how little I knew about how and where your body weight on the bike can change how the bike works, and how little I knew about those 2 giant chunks of the machine, and then knowing that there were thousands of other chunks of the equation that I had no clue on. I just kind of stared at the wall for a second. I was like, I thought I was bad. Turns out I'm terrible. It just got better from there.
No.
But that's really interesting. I mean, Ross, I'm curious, there are points on a car where your input changes the geometry of the thing, but it never comes down to this bit of control input is necessarily part of the math of the machine of how it works in the same way, right?
So when Nick, you were talking about, first of all, Freddie talking about trail braking from the very beginning. Thank you. Yeah. I can't tell you the number of people in the car world who will say, "Oh, we don't teach trail braking." Well, maybe later when they'll learn it, but I think that's just total stupidity. But that whole thing of kind of telling the tire. There's a coach in the UK that used to work here, Rob Wilson. He's worked with a lot of Formula One drivers. He and I have spent a lot of time talking. And I remember many years ago at Sebring, him and I sitting on the pit wall talking, and we were talking about this, and we're going, you need to tell the car what you want it to do before you actually ask it to do it. And it's kind of that same thing. It's like, if you come up to a corner and just go whack with the steering wheel, tires are saying, sorry, I can't do that. But you're talking about, and I can only imagine it's, what we do in a car times 10,000 on a bike because of that travel. And I'm trying to remember who it was years ago talking to me. It was actually one of the riders that I'd done some coaching with, explaining how that swing arm flexes when the bike is on its side, like laying down. Like, hey, motorcycle, when it's upright, that makes total sense to me. There's suspension there. But when it's leaned over on those crazy lean angles that MotoGP riders are at, it's the flex in the swing arm. Is that correct? And they're feeling that and using that and tuning that?
Yeah, because there was a time in the 80s where the belief was, let's make this thing as stiff as we can.
Yeah.
Let's make the whole structure as stiff as we can. And I remember riding an RC45 that was a Camel Pro, superbike, Duhamel's bike, and they were chasing this idea of chassis flex finally because the thing was so stiff. So we've all ridden bikes, all the motorcycle guys have ridden bikes that work so well that shouldn't. I mean, I remember riding an RF 900 Suzuki that just worked so well. It's because something in that chassis was just moving right to keep the loads in, and because when it's on its side, of course, the suspension isn't working as well, and it's different loads. So there's definitely something to chassis flex. And as far as when Sam talked about moving his body around, imagine running down into the corner in your car and taking 160 pounds and sliding it across the car to the inside. It's illegal, right? Jeff, wouldn't that be nice?
I'm saying the only, you're exactly right. I would love that. And we actually talked about a guy who actually had a mercury pump in his car and he could move weight illegally. But he did that. He pumped mercury over to for kind of that reason. The only thing that I know on four wheels that's similar is karting. When you're in a high level go-kart with a sticky tire on a international type track, the movement of your body and how you brace yourself, when you turn the steering wheel, do you lock your arm to make it stiff through your whole arm and your body becomes part of the stiffness of the chassis and stuff like that? I saw a little hint of that when Colin was racing go-karts, but on a bike, you see, again, I'm a big MotoGP fan, and you see Jorge Martin with his shoulder on the ground now.
Yep.
I mean, it is insane. We used to think, oh, he's got his elbow on the ground. That's crazy. And now the shoulder on the ground. Pretty soon they're going to have to put sliders on their helmet or something. I don't know where it's going to go, but it's crazy.
Yep.
Or the guys leading their leg off to the inside, on the straightaway. Is that to do that with the weight transfer? They're trying to get why are they sticking their leg out like
Rossi
that?
talked about that. He's the one who first did it. And, it's, if you've dirt tracked, you run it on in there and you put your foot down as a auxiliary side stand, basically. But Rossi then talked about that when he had his foot lower, it lowered the center of mass. The bike didn't rotate up on the front so much, he felt. And also he felt with his leg down, he had his inside thigh against the fuel tank and could brake harder. So there's something to be said for that. And because, we called our school the Champions Riding School on purpose because we wanted to just keep evolving with these champions. So at the end of day 2, all the riders, and even some guy in his Goldwing, we say, let's go do the Rossi leg into turn 5 or wherever we are, let's go do the Rossi leg in there because it's kind of a neat thing. And for all the people who are listening and want to try Rossi leg, it's a neat thing, and try it in some downhill tight corner that's got a little gravelly, that kind of a day where it's wet. Try it in a downhill tight corner, and I think you'll love it. It just feels secure. You feel like you got your foot on the ground already. So we all the students have to do Rossi leg. So wow. the idea be hanging off. You should all riders should mess with body position to the inside of the center line. To run less lean angle. That's the main thing. We're running less lean angle. And at our school, we just talk simply about lean angle points versus braking points in the front and rear. But braking points in the front, we're trading off brake points for lean angle points. In the rear, we're trading off lean angle points for throttle. If we want to add more throttle, we ideally give away lean angle points. So for all y'all to try hanging off the mid corner to see if you can run less lean angle. And of course, if you can run less lean angle, more brake pressure is available, more throttle pressure is available. To me, it's more brake pressure for safety on those corners that you're downhill. on a rainy day on a road you've never seen before, you got your sweetie on the back, and you can move a little bit to the inside and trail brake in there and run less lean angle, more brake pressure.
So you called it the Rossi leg, and one of the things we talk about here a lot is, the general curve of not just purebred race cars, but road cars in a lot of ways over the last 20 years has been, as tires have kind of evolved and kind of focused into most of them working the same way, as race cars have gotten more and more aero and more ride height sensitive and more pitch sensitive. More and more platforms behave more and more similarly. There's less and less room, by design in some cases and by accident in some cases, for driver style, and that's neither a plus nor a negative. It just is, right? How much, and by that I mean, let me back up. By that I mean room for two people who drive completely differently to hop into the same car and find the same lap time, right? How much room is there on a bike on modern tires, something that's like bang on the edge of the envelope in terms of what can be done in a road bike, super bike, or MotoGP bike? How much room is there for technique and style? And, Rossi does it this way and Marquez does it this way. And I know they're different. I know they go about as quick in some cases, but is that gap big or small for anybody? And I don't mean those guys specifically, just bikes in general.
Yep. I think at the top level, when they all qualify within, not all, but the first 4 rows are within 0.8 to a second of the pole. At the top level, it's all pretty dialed in. If you look at, and you look at Jack Miller, for instance, insanely talented and insanely driven guy, but his head position hanging off is not the same as Bagnaia. It's not the same as Marquez. So, and Mark, as you know, Jack, as you know, he slides backward during the race. His tires go off. So when grip is good, he can get away with a little bit of I'd say wrong technique. And I'd love to talk to him because, I think I could help him, frankly. But his head position is just a little bit high as opposed to looking out past your eyebrows. And so at the pointy end, MotoGP, Moto2, National Superbike, there's not a lot of differentiation available to run the lap time on that. But at a lower level, down into club racing and certainly track day riding and street riding, there's huge margins to be gained with proper technique. And that just means, what are the best in the world doing? And Ross, that's really how we teach it. We don't, I got 9-time we're a heavyweight endurance national champion, Chris Paris, who runs schools, and he still teaches not necessarily what he is doing. He's teaching what the best in the world are doing. But the caveat is he's trying to do what the best in the world do as well. So once someone falls into this pattern of best practices, the bike they're on goes really, really fast. And so you'll put Cody Wyman onto our instructors. You'll put him on his lightweight bike, which was a Ninja 400, and he can lap as quickly as almost anybody on a big bike other than racers. So there's huge lap time and safety available with proper techniques. That best practices search is gigantic with us. So your son could come to our school, like Colin could come to the school, and or your a 16-year-old granddaughter can come to the school, and she will hear best practices. Not that she is going as fast as Bagnaia, but we believe she's got to do the same things as Bagnaia.
Yeah.
You talked about Freddie Spencer being addicted to learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that separates the very, very best from everybody else. And, a guy like Jack Miller, is he as addicted to learning something new as somebody else, perhaps? And this gets into the whole sort of mental game part of it. And I'm curious to hear kind of your approach to coaching the mental part of it. And I've worked with some motorcycle racers through the years. Joe Kopp, flat track, Hall of Famer. Top fuel drag guy, Steve Dorn. Taylor Knapp. I think he's still hanging around, isn't he? Is he still?
Oh, yeah.
I coached him his very first year, but all in sort of just the mental game, because obviously I can't teach him those techniques. So I'm curious how you integrate, or is it part of the curriculum when you're training, when you're going through a school, or is it something that's just like, that rider is struggling in this area, we need to help them with that, and that's more of a mental part of it? Just curious.
It's part of the curriculum, and one of the sayings that the students will hear very early is we need to move away from being an emotional rider and get to be a technical rider. And so the focus becomes on not I hate this corner, but why is my bike not working in this corner? That truly is a big part of what we're chasing. So that mental game of coming in after every session at our school, we run through these champ scores, and it's basically I think 16 techniques you can score yourself with, like brakes past tip in, how long did I stay with my plan, body position, body timing, stuff like that. So they start to become this technical rider, and as they start to build our scores towards 10s, they start to realize that they're going faster, which most of the students want to do that. They certainly feel safer. So we go that way. The second thing we do, Ross, is road racers in our, and probably your sport as well, we have a very short memory. We have to have a very short memory because if you make a mistake in 3 and you shake your head and cry about it, you're going to crash in 6, and that will happen very, very quickly. So Freddie Spencer said to the school this winter, he says, "I'll make a mistake at corner entry and I'll fix it by the apex," and he means fix it with brakes and body position, but also he fixes it in his mind where he's over it. And so you talk to some of these. You talk to an amateur level racer, low down, or a track day rider, and they will talk about their crashes. You talk to a professional, and I can't remember that I've ever crashed in my life. That's how we mentally get over it, right? Yeah. Now I remember the lessons, but I really get past it. So we get super focused on the technique, and that does build the confidence, because when the technique is right, the bike works, and all of a sudden you're having fun. It's where you want to be. You're passing people instead of getting passed. So that's an approach to it.
Can they be too focused on it? Like I see drivers sometimes that are like they're trying to drive by the book. Mm-hmm. They're trying to
1, 2,
yeah.
Where was I? 2?
Yeah. And sometimes you kind of need to let go of that too, right? That's what makes this thing, our sport, so much fun, is that balance.
It is, but I do believe they have to go through the steps first.
Yes.
But, I think we've all had those days where people talk about, I'm hovering over my motorcycle watching myself ride, and it's just those magic days. Yeah. It's also pretty fascinating when we talk about becoming less emotional, more technical. It's pretty fascinating toward the end of the year. Like, look what Bagnaia did this year. I mean, if you haven't watched MotoGP, he had to win because he had some crashes and some other things. He had to win, and he won everything in the last 2 or 3 rounds, the sprint race, and the final. So when you are emotionally into it, there's a big part of that. But we believe that the emotion comes from of confidence of knowing you're doing things correctly. That's a big part of it. So I do think I don't mind when the students will say, I got to slow this down. I got to take 20% off. I got to get these steps right. I think that not has to be there for every personality, but for some personalities have to go through those steps.
That makes sense.
You mentioned. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
I was just going to say, listening to you guys talk is fascinating. And this is a question actually kind of different, but for both Nick and Ross. Do you think that if you're a car racer, 2 days with Nick's school and you don't want to be a motorcycle racer, you just want to be a better car racer. Do you think that 2 days with Nick would help you become a better car racer? And the reverse, do you think, Nick, that if a motorcycle guy who aspired to be a good motorcycle racer, or he was a good guy, he's a good AMA guy, let's say, would 2 days with training with Ross in a car be helpful? And I'm not really talking about the mental side of it. We're going to assume that's similar, but the technique of driving a car and the technique of a motorcycle, would they translate and be helpful?
Sam, can you? Did I, one of the questions I had for Sam, and I thought I would ask off the record, but is there things that you left the school with that helped you in your car driving? I guess was my question.
That's a great, that was a good.
So it was interesting, right? There were so many things. I didn't grow up on dirt bikes. I didn't find bikes until my 20s. which meant that there were so many kind of instinctive things that happen if, when your brain's soft and rubbery, you've wired yourself to behave a certain way, like body position and what, reactive inputs at the limit of grip, things like that. And that stuff did not come naturally to me, and still takes conscious thought to kind of click into that piece of software in my brain. I say click into it. It's like if we're sitting here on the internet through a browser looking, that's a piece of software. This is like two dumb switches and they're rusty, and then one of them goes bzzz, and then a light kind of flickers on and then goes off. But that was a conscious choice, and it made me think about all of the things, because I've been sliding around doing goon stuff in cars since I was young. I've been around race cars and dealing and thinking with reading about the limit of grip in a car since before I can remember. And I guess YCRS made me stop and think about all the bits of what I do in a car that are hardwired and how much I take them for granted, but also kind of re-examining why I do some of that and unpacking it and trying to do it better, trying to think more about it instead of just letting it be reactive. That was really helpful, because, there are things that when you've been doing anything for decades, you just kind of, it's like what Ross was talking about, what we talked about with Colin, the notion of constantly re-examining what you're doing. I've tried to do that since day one, but to be honest with you, I hadn't realized that, some days that's 98% of what I'm doing, and some days that's like down to 20. And it was just this great big reminder that so much of what we end up doing ends up being, I don't know, you get into habits, and it doesn't matter how much you try to get out of it, right? I mean, does that make sense, Ross? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, you've heard me say this about a billion times, is we do what we do because we're programmed to do so. Sometimes we don't do what we want because we don't have the right programming yet, or access the wrong programming. So, Jeff, to your question, I mean, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this. I've done a big thinking about this a long time ago, but I've actually been writing something I'm calling Building the Perfect Beast. And it's kind of like if Lawrence Stroll had come to me 20-something years ago and said, I've got a kid, turn him into a Formula One driver. He's now 1 year old. What would you do to him? One of the things I would do is I'd have that kid on a dirt bike as early as he could, and he'd spend a ton of time driving a dirt bike. Obviously, he'd drive a go-kart. He would drive a simulator. Like, I'd have him doing all sorts of other sports. So I think that part of it, the balance part of it, I think is so critical. But the one thing that I think we can, as coaches, instructors, teachers, we can influence, but we can't totally train, is that addiction to learning, the work ethic that goes along with that. That's the thing actually, I think parenting has more to do that with anything than anything else. So if you really want your kid to be in Formula One or whatever, have your kid come and live with me, and he can do all the work for me around the house. So,
okay, so that leads an interesting question, right? And it's for Nick and Ross, right? So Nick, go first if you don't mind. What's the number one thing most people struggle with on a bike when they're trying to go faster?
I'd thought about this idea, Sam, to talk about the car to bike thing, because I wanted to hear what you thought. And also, we've had 4 students that I can think of that when they introduced themselves on day one, they said, I am not a motorcycle rider. I ride them, but I'm a car racer. And the only people beating me are bike racers. So Ross, that's truly what they said. I'm here only because I need to know what they know. And, I do. Cool. And so I've been thinking about that for years. My wife and I are really into cars as well. All my guys are into cars. We're all closet car freaks, So I think it's dealing with 5 inches of weight transfer, I think, is a big deal. Realizing the contact patch has to be expanded with initial follower brakes or steering. That really helps. And I think, Ross, that the absolute catastrophe of a crash means that every small mistake is examined by a motorcycle racer. We never, I spun off in turn 3. It is a catastrophe. And so that focus on totally eliminating mistakes bleeds into the car. You get in the car and you just do not want to make mistakes. You do not jump over the limits of grip, blah, blah, blah. You try your best. So that's part of it. And I think then so that's how I started to really think about it. And there's so many racers: Scott Russell, Eddie Lawson, Freddie Spencer, Kenny Roberts, of course. Oh, geez. I mean, so many racers in my time that jump into cars and go really, really fast right away.
Yeah.
Now we generally overwork the outside front, but if they can get that focused on, not try to rush it everywhere, they really go well in cars because it's so similar. Steering wheel angles, lean angle, brakes and throttle, all that stuff. So we just did a grad school last week down at Indy, and we put everybody into the rental vans to very start with, and everybody drove the rental vans. So we really look at it as a tool, and we say, okay, it's winter time, but you're still driving your car. This is lean angle. You're trail braking lean angle, adding lean angle. You're taking away lean angle, adding throttle. I mean, we just keep really beat on it. So we love the car analogies and the examples. And then the thing that people struggle with when they try to go fast on a motorcycle, well, there's quite a few things, but one of the top would be just on pure speed is they cover the same ground in less time. And once you realize you're covering the same distance in less time, now brake pressure has to come in earlier, steering has to happen earlier, you have to turn the bike earlier, you have to have your eyes in sooner, which leads to all other problems. So it's kind of crazy because we'll have a rider take big steps during the class and then miss apexes because they're just literally doing everything too late. They're doing everything correctly, but they were doing it at the old place that did work at slower speed. So taking that step is a big thing. If we have a kid come into our school very good on a 125, then his or her problem will be initial throttle on a 600. That'll get him on a 600. So you have to step up in your realization of time versus speed, and you have to step up in realization of what initial throttle is on. So for instance, people will say, "Hey, what percentage of throttle should I use to hold my radius? What should my neutral throttle be?" And we'll say, "Well, we'll joke, well, on an R3, it might be 33%. On an R1, it might be 0.75%, right?
Yeah.
Right, Ross? Because it's different. So if you can make those changes saying, okay, I'm getting on a faster bike, I have to really pay attention with covering ground in less time and initial throttle, you can step over some of those mistakes safely.
So, Nick, I just go to my standard. It depends.
It depends.
Yeah,
It depends.
Right.
All the time.
Seriously.
Yeah.
You can teach at our school.
Yeah. Great. You got a job
Ross,
finally. Yeah.
So that's the other side of the question, Ross. So what's the number one thing most people struggle with on a car trying to go faster? Like the one thing you see most often, any skill level, whatever it is.
I'm going to go back to what Nick said in the very beginning. Trying to go fast without having been classically trained. They don't understand why they're doing what they're doing or what they should be doing. They don't have those basics done before trying to go fast. Because maybe the good and the bad of a car over a bike is, and a bike, I got to think that going really fast there's more of, this is fast. Whereas in a car, you can kind of get away with it. So drivers just drive fast. And especially some cars, especially today, is so many cars are so forgiving that they get away with it. So they never really learn. They're not classically trained. They don't get those basic techniques from the very beginning.
I would love to have had Colin give that Ford GT40. Sorry, the Ford GT40. I would love him to be given the ownership for that, to drive it hard. Because Jeff, it would have got him. There's no nannies, right? There's no nannies. There's no ABS. There's nothing. And so I would love some of these kids that have enormous talent to get out of those nannies. And I know Casey Stoner, he said one of the great regrets of his life is that he wasn't in the 500 era where 500s had no nannies. Maybe some toward the end. It's hard to get anybody to admit it, but had no nannies. They wheelied, they spun the tire, and everything else. So I wish Colin would have. I guess he said he got scared because they knocked the tires with a hammer, and somebody said don't crash this one. But honestly, if he could get a chance in those no nanny cars, I would love it because it does. One of the biggest things that these old timers will say is it's all so damn even because you can make mistakes, like Ross said, and live through them.
Yep, that's why he loved like the global rallycross car on dirt and tarmac in the same lap and jumps and stuff like that.
Yep.
And he actually did track day riding with a couple buddies of his on a motorcycle. And he got to the point after about 4 weekends of doing that where he's like, he got like you do, right? You get competitive, and he got, to a level where he's like, okay, I'm pretty quick here. Like I'm like in the intermediate, top of the intermediate class group, and now I'm gonna crash. And my real job requires me to have both legs not broken, so I gotta stop.
Yep.
But I know he learned a lot from that.
Good. That's neat.
It was it's that precision, I think, is that what he always said. It's you have to be precise in a car, right? But boy, if you're not precise on a motorcycle, you're in a world of hurt, and it forces you to really think about that precision.
Yeah, that's a good word. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Valentino Rossi has done pretty impressive in a GT3 car. I mean, and not impressive for a bike rider, impressive for a driver. I mean, he's done great, and doesn't surprise me. And you see guys like, I think, Lewis Hamilton and Shirley, Michael Schumacher always love jumping on a bike, and it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah.
So Nick, I want to kind of switch a little bit from the technique stuff to, I want to understand, how did you make the switch from, and sorry, I hate it when somebody goes, I think you used to be a driver, didn't you? Like, so I don't want that to come across as, but how did you kind of switch from a racer to a teacher? And what was that like, and what motivated that? And I mean, it seems to me that you're passionate about what you do as a teacher. And I want to understand how that worked for you.
When I was at the magazine, I was at Sport Rider, and I had won 2 number 1 plates at Willow, so I was the fastest guy at Willow in some classes. And this guy named Don Spina said, "Why don't you start a school on the Friday track day, the practice day before the Willow weekends?" And this was back when Willow had 1,000 racers. I mean, it was big money. I made a lot of money racing motorcycles at Willow, and so I started this school. And so I was racing and coaching, and I just basically hired all my friends who were all class champions, and brought them in to coach, and actually met my wife there. She attended the school, and so we ended up talking and dating and got married. So it was really good that way. But that's how it happened, Ross, where I was a qualified racer, and they asked me to run a school, and I'd really convinced myself in my racing that it was not the bike. I mean, that's why your podcast,
it's not the bike.
It was not the bike.
Somebody always has to say it.
Yeah. Yes. And I remember that really hit me hanging out with Eddie Lawson. He's a 4-time world champion. And I got a chance to do these stories with him every race, after every 500 race, called Lawson's Lines. And I would call him in Europe, or he would be home, and I would go see him. And I really started to hang out with him. And the way he went about life really was focused on what he did, how he did it, his diet, his workout. I mean, he rarely talked about setup. He would laugh at his teammates would go 2 laps, come in, make a bunch of changes, 2 laps, come in, make a bunch of changes. He's like, what are you doing? You got to, it's all us. So that really hit me. I took that into my teaching. And then I contacted Honda about a school, and I said, I'd like to run a big school. And they said, well, that's a good idea, but we got one guy ahead of you, and that was Freddie. And so I was racing at Las Vegas and 250 Grand Prix, and Freddie made the announcement at Las Vegas at the AMA race, and I'd met him a couple times just through interviews and stuff, and didn't really like him really at that point. He was always kind of bored with journalists, and I don't blame him. But
we're boring people. It's fine.
Yes,
it's like it's on point.
Yep. So I walked up to him and reintroduced myself, and I said, "Freddie, this is truly where I want to go, and I would love to help you start the school. And if I'm a good fit, da da da." And that was '97. So that just went for 12 years. So that's kind of how it happened. And then Ross, my wife's dad, Gene, once said, you shouldn't quit things that you love. You should just step down, reprioritize. And so if I have a 50-year-old student come to me and said, hey, I'm not going to be happy until I win the National Superbike Championship, that person may never be happy. I mean, I will help him or her. I mean, let's dig in and do it, but you probably won't do it at this age. So, for different reasons. And so I started to race, club race on my 250. And then after that was done and that went well, stepped down from nationals basically. Then I got hooked up with ARMA, which is, do you know ARMA? American Historic Racing Motorcycle Association.
Yeah.
It's
racing.
Yeah. It's vintage racing, but a lot of modern bikes, singles and twins and triples, a lot of modern bikes. But I wanted to race vintage bikes. So I raced a TZ750 and a Spondon chassis that Bigley built. And then a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, and I'm 63 now. So I was 61 and I was racing this frickin', basically something that's trying to kill you every corner, which is super fun, super exciting. My crew watched me at New Jersey, and he came in and he said, "What are you gonna do? Just mess around and wheelie everywhere? You just go screw around and wheelie everywhere?" And that's how it had to be ridden. It was crazy. And about 2 years ago, I thought, you know what, this is a little bit too crazy for what I really want to do. And so I ended up with a really nice FCR 600, which is the 1990 model. That is the same model of bike I raced at nationals back in the day. So it's really kind of a fun life. So Ross, I never have had to step out of racing because I would watch all these racers say I'm retiring and have a retirement party, then come back and race. Yeah. And I thought, okay, I'm going to skip that. I'm going to never retire. I just will fade away. So now I race my little FCR 600. My brother's my pit crew. We go to races around us. We can make it and still keep my hand in it. Still keeps me young. And what really keeps me young is running around the racetrack at schools with Isaiah Davis and Cody Wyman and Chris Paris and Ryan Burke. These Michael Haynow, these young, very insanely national championship winning racers. Running around with them keeps me in it too. So do you still jump in a car yourself and go roll around?
Next weekend I'm going to go to VIR and go and do an endurance race. So yes. So when anybody's stupid enough to say, "Hey, would you come and drive my car?" Yeah, I'm there. So yes. The other thing I didn't realize is your background at Willow Springs. Like I went to the Jim Russell Racing School there way back when, and at the end of it they said, "Do you want to stay and be an instructor here?" And nice. For me it was like, and one of the other instructors said, "No, if you want to go racing, get away from here. Like, go do something else, go racing." But it planted a seed, and it was like, "Oh, I could teach this." And I instructed some tennis stuff, and so I like the feeling of when you say something or you do something and you see that light bulb. And to this day, I still love that. So it's interesting that I'm going to say that Willow Springs contributed to me being where I am and doing what I'm doing now, and sounds like the same thing. So, yay, Willow Springs.
Yeah. Well, it's quite a compliment too, Ross, to go to a school and be asked to be an instructor. That's quite a compliment. So it's good.
Well, I think they were pretty desperate.
Whatever.
Nick, yeah. Nobody on this show accepts a compliment ever. It's a rule. It's just how it works.
But I think both of you guys, both Nick and Ross, I see it in Ross, and I can tell already just from the little bit I know you, Nick, is there's a pleasure and a satisfaction in helping somebody else accomplish something, teaching basically. And I see a little bit of that in me too. I don't race engineer as much as I did 5 years ago. I'm more like a competition director, helping the young engineers learn and make the right decisions and kind of guiding them. And I get a real big pleasure out of seeing a race engineer make a setup on the car after talking to his driver and going through the process, and then the car's better. And I can see him, very quietly kind of do that kind of thing to himself. Yeah. And I see you guys, I know I see Ross and Nick, you must get that with your riders. When you talk about it, work on it, he's struggling, and then he gets it. That must give you a good satisfaction.
Well, and maybe more so than what you've experienced, because people die on motorcycles. And so, everybody thinks that we're a racing school. Not everybody anymore, because we push so hard to let people know that the proper technique is proper technique, no matter where you are, how fast or slow you're going. So when you get notes and you get video of people on board video where the deer jumps out and they're covering the brake lever, which means you're riding at all times on the public highways with your fingers up, covering the brake lever. Even though you're taught to not cover the brake lever in a new rider school, we make it a big deal. We're covering the brake lever. The deer jumps out. You're right there. You're quicker to the brake lever. We get these videos and these people commenting. It's game changing for them. It's life changing, and that's a feeling that my young instructors never expected, is to get that thank you from their graduates. Where a graduate shows up, a student shows up and says, privately, I'm here because I crashed. I'm about ready to quit, but I just have this passion for this. I just love it. But I cannot do it well, and we change their lives. And on the racing side, we had a kid named Ryan Burke comes to the school, and he was very fast in Colorado. He could win races. He couldn't win championships because he kept crashing. He came to our school and then won 6 number 1 plates in a row, like 23 lap records.
Wow.
Just changed his life, because we only changed him 1/10 here, 2/10 there, 3/10 there, 1/10 there to find him a second and a half continuously. And both his parents came up to us separately and said, "Thank you for saving us so much money." It was such a money savings. He had 1 year, maybe 4 years ago, where he did not lose and he did not fall down. And that, once you're starting to do that, so those feelings, Ross, I think you've felt that with people.
Yeah. So beyond the racing side, still, I've done some of that stuff where, teen driving schools and that kind of thing. And when you get a parent come to you and say, "Hey, thank you, you saved my kid's life," that's a whole other thing than, sorry, Jeff, but seeing Colin win another championship is like, that's boring, But
I get it. I get it.
But Nick, I'm going to say, like, there was a point in my life that yes, I was instructing because it was my side job, right? I was trying to make a living as a race driver, and it's a tough thing. But I'm going to say, like, to be a pro. And you've been around guys like Freddie and Lawson and all these guys. Yep. You have to be selfish to some extent. And I'm going to say that I have seen racers who were selfish. This is all about me. I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to be the very best in the world. I'm going to win world championships. And they try to make that transition to a teacher, instructor, coach.
Yep.
And they can't change that part of it.
Yep.
That doesn't mean they're bad people, but they just can't switch that. And I think to do what you're doing now, you've had to compartmentalize the selfish part where you go and play, and then there's it's all about my students. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, amen. That is exactly right. And one of the things that I tell my instructors, but right in front of the students, I said, every one of my instructors has been helped at the right moment with the right advice. And I know I was. I remember being at Willow Springs, and I was quick for the national qualifying, and I was quick. I was in the top 5-ish, but I wasn't quite there. And Scott Gray told me something, and he was Yoshimura factory rider and rode this big Papa insane bike. And Scott Gray told me a couple little things, and that put me, and I won it. So those are the kind of things that I'll always remember. And I ask my instructors to remember the times that they were helped by the right advice, and be that person that changes that life by pulling aside someone and saying the right thing to them at the right moment. So that's part of it. Number 2, we pay our guys well. We pay our guys well. It can be a career. It can be a job.
Okay, I want a job with you then. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good day rate. If we could do a school every day, these guys would be very, very well off. Of course, we can't. It's just not the market yet, but we're working on building that. So that's part of it. Number 2 is a job. Number 3 is we have a saying, and the saying is that we're in the customer service business on motorcycles, and that's truly what we have to say. Now, I think customer service is something that everybody parrots, and probably every restaurant thinks they have great customer service, and maybe in front of the boss they do. But that is truly what has to happen, that the person who pays, basically $3,000 by the time it's all done to show up and take our school has to get what they need. So, and I'd like to ask Sam about whether he did or not. So that I really want to see if we did it. But when we introduce in the first 5 minutes of the school, we say there's rule number 5. And rule number 5 is students, for you students, is you get what you need. You get what you need, because we had students at schools in the past. We get all done with the school, and then some student on the internet or wherever else says, you know what, I never got what I needed. They never talked about the rear brake or whatever he or she felt we didn't talk about. And so we made this rule number 5, to where the student has to come up to us and has to ask the question, what about rear brake? Well, you never did this. I need more help on that. So that has helped my instructors to realize that these students are allowed to ask any question they want. And because you're a well-paid expert, you have to give your best answer. So Sam, on this, how'd we do?
So that's actually exactly where I was going to go with it, because what shocked me about it, at this point, I've been to more 4-wheeled performance schools and actually a pretty decent handful of 2-wheeled schools than I can remember. And YCRS more than any other, and this is not a paid advertisement. I just actually really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. More than any other, I was shocked at how I'd ask an off-piste question, and then somebody you or one of the other guys would come over and go, "Oh, cool, interesting. Let's talk about that." And there was as much patience and interest in for a school where there's a large class and there's a good amount of instructors, but there's also not an infinite amount of time or people. There was as much patience and as much variation and interest in tuning things for every individual person that I think I've ever seen anywhere. And that's what was, my hang up and my hitch was, like I said earlier, it was all in figuring out how all of these habits from cars and not being a pro, not being, the guys who had, not being a Colin for 1,000, like a better way to put it, all of those things that I knew how to do elsewhere didn't translate, and I figuring out kind of the language to get them to mesh, and then not to be quick immediately, but to start learning the stuff I needed to know. And everybody there was just really, really interested in talking about it and helping. And if this show has taught America or, thousands of people one thing, is that Sam can't shut up. So there was just an awful lot of talking about it. It was great. I learned so much, mainly because, it really was variable. Just you could tune the thing. It was rad.
Good. If I could add one more thing, Ross, before I interrupt you, one of the truths is the people who come to our school are people we would like to hang out with.
Yeah.
If you really do think about who would you choose to be in your circle? Well, I want someone who's interested in learning. I want someone who rides motorcycles, who wants to ride motorcycles quickly and safely. I want to be around people who are success oriented enough to where they can afford a middle of the week school that costs a lot of money. So that's definitely one of the things our instructors talk about, is that we really like these people, right? Sam Smith's coming to our school, right? Everybody knows that, but this is going to be cool. And so now I'm not saying we don't get some people that are a little bit on the spectrum, and that's fine. But isn't it our job to get them out of that spectrum problems into understanding this process? So those are challenges, and we have never told anyone ever in the time I've done this that they shouldn't ride a motorcycle. Yet I've heard that's part of some of these new rider schools where they tell the rider, this is not for you. Why don't you go home? And that's truly a problem. So we've never said you shouldn't ride a motorcycle. We have said, hey, you should probably come back, but we've never said you shouldn't ride. So we like
Nick,
people.
Yeah, Nick, you nailed it. And there are instructors in the car world out there that will refer to this OSB, other sport beckons. Basically, I've given up on you. You can't do this. And I'm 100% behind what you're saying is, I don't care where somebody is, where they're at now. They can always improve. I don't care how good, bad, whatever you are, you can always improve. So
love it.
That really makes me mad when I hear that. And maybe my last question, I could sit here and talk to you, Nick, for days on end here, but your writing, I write to learn. Like I write to think. That's how I think, is I write stuff. How has your writing impacted your riding and your teaching?
We've had a couple of our owners say that the curriculum's different and better than others because I'm a rider, right? So when you sit down in front of computer and you're trying to put your thoughts onto paper that others will understand, that is an interesting process. I mean, how many times you go through it and say, boy, it's still not clear. So that's an interesting process. And people have paid me that compliment. Hey, I think the curriculum's better because you write. So that's really good. The plasticity of the brain depends on you changing what you do. And so when you're writing something, it's so different than verbal, than videotape, than verbal. It's just a whole different process. In fact, some of the books I've read, if you can write in cursive, it'll make you talk better, right? Yeah, you're nodding your head. So those are the kind of things that I think about putting into my program. So the writing has helped me. Also, Ross, I get to talk to so many fascinating people. I interviewed, if you're doing a story with Eddie Lawson after every Grand Prix, things rub off on you. It just rubs off. That how Eddie could not make an excuse. He could not make an excuse for. I'd have to say, well, Eddie, didn't your front tire go flat and that's why you lost? Well, yeah. He would finally say, yeah, that did happen, but I got beat. That's that. So you get that idea that he got beat through things that he controlled, and that when he did well, he didn't get beat. So that rubs off on you because he's writing it. So that really affected me quite a bit. And you start, when you're a journalist, you get to rub elbows with all these people. And if you have a certain mindset, when you're talking to Kenny Roberts Sr., for instance, you are listening to how did he become a world champion, and how did he become, grand national champion, and what processes you go to, and that all equates into what you write about. Certainly, it affects your life. I remember riding in Eddie Lawson's car and how he loaded up the outside front tire, and I didn't think about it then. I just remember riding there, going, we're getting the load put in, and sitting there thinking about what he was doing, and that all just affects what you're doing. And of course, that affects my instructors, because I have a very strong belief in hiring people better than you, which I have done. I've got insane instructors that truly believe. They ride really well, of course, but they truly believe in what we're doing. And then I get to coach them. And so I've put together an instructor Bible, where I'd like them to read through this Bible. And it's this approach to take people who, from all walks of life, that's the goal, all walks of life. And if they have the one thing that Kenny Roberts Sr. said need to have, and he said, you only need one thing, and that's desire. He says, I'll teach you the rest. And so my instructors, and I don't know if they said that in your school, Sam, but my instructors will say, you only need one thing, and that's desire. We'll teach you the rest. So that's the feeling we're trying to have at our school is, hey, bring desire. And, final thought on this one, but I went to a 3-day open wheel car at Laguna, open wheel car school at Laguna back in the day. And I was a journalist. I had no money, and I just spent, a lot of money to go to the 3-wheel. And we had the main instructor. I don't know who it was. I don't even say the school, but he sat there on the corner of his desk like this, talking down to us like, you idiots, try to get through turn 3, and like that. I remember thinking, you motherfucker, I spent that much money, and that's what so that really affected me. And I tell my instructors, show up, give 100%, or please don't come, just don't show up, don't drag us down. So that's one thing. The second thing, Ross, it got that idea of rule number 5 in my brain. Because if I would have been smarter, I would have walked up to him, because he was obviously an expert. I would have walked up and said, hey, in turn 4, when I do this happens. What should I do? I would have been more aggressive in my learning, and I wasn't. So I put part of that on me. Like, I should be more aggressive, and that became rule number 5 at our school, where the students have to go, hey, you know what? I don't understand what you're saying. Please explain it. That's how it happened.
That's so you even I need to come to your school. That was obvious from the start.
We're all coming.
We're all going.
Bring Colin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We'll do that.
Okay.
Seriously, we need to do that. I was riding my. I've done these track days, and the track days that I did in Texas, I think it's a very good track day group. And they have instructors, especially for the beginners class. You have to do it in a certain way, and they'll ride around you and watch you. And then when it's over, you go to the classroom and you can ask questions. So I'm not knocking that concept at all. But it took me, I wondered about it from like day 1 for 3 weekends, and could never really, I'd ask, or maybe there wasn't a time to ask a question, like you were saying, get what you need. I could not figure out the downshifting. And I was like, and then suddenly some guy says, well, your bike, it was a 600 Kawasaki. It's got a slipper clutch. Just downshift it. Don't worry about it. And I'm, because I was worried, if I don't match these gears and get the throttle matched perfectly, I was going to lock the rear wheel and I'd be on my side. And then once I figured that out, it was like, oh, this downshifting is pretty easy. It would be great to have just been able to, like at your school, just say, what about this downshifting thing? And maybe that was the wrong answer. You have a slipper clutch, don't worry about it. But I think that's really important, because I think we have so many questions that kind of scare us. One of the questions we always ask our race car drivers is, what's the one thing you want changed to your car to make it better mechanically? I guarantee you at your school, there's one thing that everybody's a little nervous about, whether it's leaning over too far or getting on the throttle too much. And so I love that concept. I think that's great.
I think, and if that's the testament, right? I think the point here is that if Jeff Brown, who has been around this his entire life, has won more championships than I have hairs on my arm, and like both in and out of the car, is good at what he does. If he gets to a point where he's like, well, this thing that I probably shouldn't ask about the machine, but I don't know who to ask. Like, if that can happen to Jeff, that can happen to anybody. And the key environment, if I've learned anything from talking to Ross and listening and thinking about all this, it's that it really just comes down to the freedom to ask the dumb questions. And I don't know, man. I mean, as a species, like, humans got a lot of dumb questions, and just pretending that we don't is the best way to paint yourself into a corner. But,
hey, Sam, there are no dumb questions.
Questions, right?
Oh God, this is another brand of yours. You do,
now we're back.
Yeah, all they do, Nick, is just come back and just it's not the car. Okay.
It reinvigorates me to discuss this, because to make sure the schools that I'm not at, that the instructors are really pushing rule number 5. When you walk into the classroom, rule number 5 is on the board. That's all that's on the board. So it reinvigorates me to make sure we do this, because it's certain personalities don't want to ask. And Ross, before you go, I want to comment on you to build a Formula One, the ultimate beast. The reason that you could is because you would teach the 2, 3, 4-year-old the right stuff. Because one of the things that we struggle with very often is a rider that comes in. He or she's been racing ARMA, so they're trying to go quick. They're racing ARMA, but they come in with 15 years of the wrong technique.
Yeah,
and whether we will break that habit or not in 2 days really does come down to us being very clear about the problem, clear about the fix, and then them focusing, especially overnight, especially between day 1 and day 2. So that is that's a big part of our school, is breaking some bad habits. And if you took a 2-year-old, 3-year-old kid and taught him the right things,
would that be cool?
It'd be impressive.
Yeah.
Yes, it'd be very cool.
So
very
Nick,
cool.
I have to ask the dumb question. You've told us what rule number 5 is.
Yep.
But you haven't told us about rule 1 through 4.
Yeah.
Are you saving that?
Let's all go in the same direction.
Okay.
Be nice to our bikes if you rented them.
Okay.
Passing has to be polite.
And
when we get into passing, we get into parallel with or going away from. So that's the rule. It's starting to spread throughout the track day world. Parallel with or going away from, because a lot of track days teach outside passing only, but now you go around the outside, the guy stands it up, he's into your brake lever, so that doesn't work. So parallel with going. And then the final rule is, if you tip one of our rental bikes over, you've got to pay for the damage. So those are the other 4 rules. And we sometimes forget all about them. We don't even get to them because rule number 5 is so important. Sam, do you ever hear the other 4 rules?
No, I'm sitting here like, God, did I just forget all of that stuff? Like, where does this come from? But no, that's so. Yeah, that all makes sense.
So my last thing, Nick, is because you just touched on this outside pass and stand up and into the brake lever. I just happened last night. I'm kind of like, I'm gonna poke around and look into a couple of things that you've written. And there was a story about Freddy Spencer teaching Rossi, was it? Yeah, about doing that, and he did it to you apparently to demonstrate it.
Yes. Yeah, dirt tracking.
Yeah.
We dirt tracked on hundreds, and so yeah, Freddie demonstrated that on me.
Yeah.
That was pretty good.
Okay, so
and
unpack that.
knocked
So
you
what do
down.
you mean?
And,
Yeah.
To demonstrate to Valentino Rossi that this is how you do that.
Yeah, that's how you do that. So he had the
Great.
crash test dummy, but we would go dirt tracking on these XR100s with Freddie, insanely good dirt tracker, and Jeff Haney, who just, he won Ascot. He's just insanely good. And so all of the instructors, me, Ken, Dale, we would just wait for the dirt track days. I mean, they were just like, we were just chomping at the bit. We could hardly wait to get our gear on. They were so much fun. And so Freddie's like, yeah, Nick, go ride around out there. Okay, let me show you something. So it was pretty good. It was pretty good. And Freddie's the kind of guy who could do that and you'd laugh along with him. He's just a good dude. And it was a great time. And he's now done with MotoGP. He was their main marshal. And really redid all their marshaling. He added like 25 cameras around the racetrack to do it. And now he's all done. So now, of course, I got a call into him and saying, hey, come out to the schools and come ride with us and enjoy a little bit of semi-retirement, I hope.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice.
Even more reason for us to go out and visit.
Yeah.
Let us know when he's going to be there. Not that take anything away from you, but, that'd be kind of cool.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, with that, we are out of time. Nick, this has been great, man. Thank you for taking the time. It's been a pleasure. If you want more Nick, and I can't imagine why you wouldn't want more Nick Ienatsch, he's great. He's made a face. You can check out the Yamaha Champions Riding School at ridelikeachampion.com. It travels around the country. It's almost definitely appearing sometime soon, somewhere near you. You can also check out the book he wrote about fast riding. Again, it's called Sport Riding Techniques. It's entertaining, and it's written like he talks, which is to say it's fun and approachable, and you learn a lot. Also, the foreword is written by some dude named Kenny Robert. Some guy. Some dude. Whoever that is. With that, it is time, of course, to read us out. And this is a job that Ross and Jeff consistently refuse to do, despite the fact that I keep asking and offering to let them do it. But that's only because, it's because they're smart and I am not.
No, because one time you let us do it and you secretly went, and I'll never let them do that again.
It was a disaster.
I don't know, man. It's deeply entertaining for me. So, okay. It's Not the Car is written, produced, and knee-dragged into life by the three hosts you heard today, and one more wonderful guy who, fun fact, has never been on a racetrack in a vehicle of any kind. But that's okay, because one day we're going to fix that. We'll strap him into the passenger seat of some bad, fast, stupid thing that is big, loud, and fancy obnoxious, and we will crack his brain open a little. Mike, if you're listening to this, I know you are. It's going to happen. That will be partially because we love him. We love Mike. Yes, we do. It will also be because addiction loves company. And as I guess as they say with all drug dealers, the first hit is always free. His name is Mike Perlman. He is our executive producer. I'm the show's creator. If you like this episode and you like to support what we do here, check out patreon.com/notthecar and click Become a Member. We also have a merch store and show site at itsnotthecar.com. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review and share it with anybody you think might like it. Your recommendations make a huge difference, and they really do help keep It's Not the Car on the air. As always, thank you for listening. And Nick, thank you again for joining us, man.
Thank you, Nick. Keep having fun.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, have fun.